Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. And today we're going deep on something that you folks have flagged as super relevant, how company culture actually impacts learning and adaptation, and specifically how to make it work with Agile methodologies, not against them.
Yeah, that friction between, kind of the old school culture and the newer Agile ways of working that is such a common pain point.
Totally.
So I think this is going to be a good one.
Right. To help us really kind of dig into this, we're going to be looking at the book, The Culture Game by Daniel Mezick.
Okay.
And it's chock full of just really practical tools and strategies to create a more, agile and learning-focused environment. So are you ready to be a corporate culture hacker?
Let's hack this culture.
All right. So the book kicks off by making this really interesting point. The business world is like evolving at warp speed right now, thanks to technology. But a lot of companies are stuck with these kind of outdated command and control cultures that just can't keep up. It's like trying to run a marathon in lead boots. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that analogy. And the book argues that Agile offers a solution, right? Self-organizing teams, rapid learning, constant adaptation. That's how you stay ahead of the curve. But as the book highlights, many organizations try to implement Agile without addressing those underlying cultural issues, and that's where things really fall apart.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Exactly.
Right. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So Mezick proposes these tribal learning practices as a way to lay the foundation for real, true Agile adoption.
Okay.
And he compares it to software hackers back in the 70s who hacked computer systems to change the rules of the game.
Yeah.
And now managers can use similar strategies to hack their company culture.
Yeah.
What a cool concept.
It's a great analogy. And one of the first things you need to hack is the level of psychological safety in your organization. This is absolutely fundamental for any kind of learning or growth. If people are afraid to take risks or share ideas or admit mistakes, then innovation is dead in the water.
Absolutely. So how do we actually create this psychological safety thing? It sounds kind of intangible.
Yeah, it's really about sending the right signals both through your words and your actions. And leaders play a huge role in shaping that. If leaders say they value experimentation but then punish people for making mistakes, well, that sends a pretty mixed message.
It's like actions speak louder than words.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of actions, the book has this really cool concept of thinking about meetings as games.
Okay.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. Facilitate your meetings is actually one of the key tribal learning practices that Mezick outlines. And the idea is to make meetings more engaging and productive by borrowing elements from game design.
Okay.
For example, good games have clear goals, rules, a way to keep score. They also encourage what's called opt-in participation, meaning that players choose to play because they find it enjoyable and rewarding.
So how do we apply that to boring old meetings? I mean, let's be honest, most meetings are kind of a soul-sucking experience.
Yeah, for sure. Well, imagine a meeting where everyone knows the objective, they understand their role, they feel comfortable contributing ideas without fear of judgment. That's the kind of environment we're aiming for.
Yeah.
And Mezick provides some really practical tools to make that happen. For instance, one of the techniques he recommends is the one practice conversation rule.
One practice conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's so simple, but surprisingly effective.
Yeah.
It basically means that during a meeting, everyone focuses on one conversation at a time. No sidebars, no checking emails under the table, just full attention on the speaker.
Oh, wow.
It might seem like a small tweak, but it can dramatically increase engagement and create a sense of respect and psychological safety.
Wow, I can see how that would make a big difference. Suddenly everyone's ideas matter.
Exactly. And when people feel heard and respected, they're much more likely to contribute their best work and be open to learning and growing.
This is making me rethink my entire approach to meetings. What other game-changing practices does Mezick recommend?
Well, another seemingly simple one, but a powerful practice is be punctual.
Okay, being on time, that's important. But how does that hack the culture?
It's not just about showing up on time. It's about sending a very clear signal that everyone's time is valuable, that we respect each other. It also creates a more efficient and focused environment. If everyone knows that the meeting will start on time, they're less likely to wander in late and disrupt the flow.
That makes a ton of sense.
Ah,
It's like setting a standard of professionalism and efficiency.
precisely. And it all ties back to creating that foundation of respect and trust
Right.
that's essential for a thriving Agile culture. Now, things get a little bit more complex when we're talking about giving feedback
Oh, yeah.
or resolving conflict situations that can easily trigger defensiveness
Yeah.
and hurt feelings.
Those are always tricky conversations. I
Right.
tend to avoid them if I can.
Well, avoidance isn't really a sustainable strategy, is it?
True.
That's where structure your interactions comes in.
Okay.
This practice is all about having clear protocols for communication, especially when things get sensitive or potentially contentious.
So like having a script for those difficult conversations.
Not exactly a script, but more like a framework. The book actually recommends using specific communication protocols,
Okay.
like core protocols, which provide a structured way to give and receive feedback,
Mm-hmm.
resolve conflicts, make decisions as a team, even when emotions are running high.
Okay. I'm really curious about these core protocols. Can you give us a quick rundown of how they work?
Yeah, sure. It's a set of simple but powerful communication practices that help create a safe and respectful space for dialogue.
Mm.
For example, there's a protocol for asking for help. There's a protocol for giving and receiving feedback, and even a protocol for checking in with each other's emotional state.
So it's like having a toolkit
Exactly.
for navigating those tricky interpersonal dynamics.
Yeah.
I love that.
And the beauty of it is that it takes the guesswork out of communication,
Yeah.
and it allows people to focus on the content of the conversation rather than getting caught up in their emotional reactions.
This is all starting to sound like a completely different way of working. What other tribal learning practices are you excited about?
Well, one that I find particularly intriguing is announce your intentions. It might seem obvious, but it's amazing how often we jump into tasks or projects without clearly communicating our goals and plans.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely been guilty of that myself.
It happens. But when leaders clearly announce their intentions, it reduces confusion. It minimizes wasted effort, and it allows teams to self-organize more effectively. Remember, in complex systems, information is power.
It's like providing a roadmap so everyone knows where they're going and how to get there.
Exactly.
Right.
And it creates a sense of transparency and trust, which, as we've already established, are crucial for a healthy and adaptive culture.
This has been an incredible deep dive so far. I'm already feeling inspired. But before we move on to even more of these tribal learning practices, I'm curious to hear what's resonating most with you so far.
One that really stands out to me is conduct frequent experiments.
Oh, yeah.
It's all about fostering a culture of experimentation, where people are encouraged to try new things, to run small tests,
Mhm.
and learn from the results.
This really resonates with me because it ties back to something we talked about earlier, psychological safety.
Right.
If you create an environment where it's okay to fail, people are much more likely to experiment and innovate.
Absolutely. And Mezick uses Zappos as a great example of this.
Okay.
They're famous for their culture of experimentation, and they even view $1 million mistake as a valuable learning investment.
Wow, that's so interesting. So instead of fearing failure, they embrace it as an opportunity to learn and improve.
Exactly. It's about shifting the mindset from failure is bad to failure is data.
Okay, so we've talked about a bunch of these tribal learning practices. Facilitating meetings, being punctual, structuring interactions, announcing intentions, conducting frequent experiments.
Mhm.
These are all fantastic, but how do we actually implement them on a larger scale?
Yeah.
Across an entire organization? That seems like a daunting task.
Well, Mezick has a really interesting approach for scaling these practices, and it's called triads.
Triads, tell me more.
A triad is a small group of 3 people, typically managers,
Okay.
who share similar values and work together to implement what he calls a micro-strategy.
Okay, we'll back up for a second. What exactly is a micro-strategy?
Think of it as a mini plan,
Okay.
a very focused action plan with a clear objective that supports the triad's shared values.
Mm-hmm.
For example, let's say a triad wants to improve communication within their teams.
Right.
Their microstrategy might involve implementing the one practice conversation rule in all their meetings and then tracking how it impacts team dynamics and productivity.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's like a small-scale experiment, but with a very specific focus.
Exactly. And the beauty of triads is that they act as these little pockets of cultural transformation, influencing the people around them and gradually spreading these practices throughout the organization.
So it's not about top-down enforcement. It's about creating a ripple effect,
Right.
starting with small groups and then expanding outward.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It's a much more organic and sustainable approach to culture change. Now, one thing that really helps to glue these cultural shifts together
Mm.
is the power of storytelling.
Oh, yeah, storytelling. The book talks a lot about that. Why are stories so important in shaping company culture?
Well, think about it. We remember stories much better than abstract concepts or bullet points.
Right.
Stories have an emotional impact that helps us connect with ideas and values on a much deeper level.
It's true. A good story can really stay with you. But how can we use storytelling to reinforce the kind of culture we're trying to create?
One way is to encourage people to share stories that embody the values you want to promote. For example, if you're trying to build a culture of innovation, you might ask people to share stories about times they took a risk, tried something new, or learned from a failure.
I love that. It's like turning abstract values into concrete, relatable experiences.
Exactly. And when those stories come from people within the organization, they carry even more weight.
Okay, so we've talked about hacking meetings, conducting experiments, using triads, and leveraging storytelling.
Right.
What other gems did you uncover from the culture game?
One that I found particularly relevant is manage visually.
Okay.
It's about radiating information and making work visible to everyone.
Oh, I love visual management. It's so much easier to understand what's going on when you can actually see it right.
Absolutely. Think Kanban boards, task boards, charts, anything that helps people visualize the status of projects and the progress being made.
It's like instead of things getting lost in emails or forgotten in meetings, everything is out in the open. You can
Right.
literally see the work happening.
Exactly. And it promotes transparency, collaboration, and a shared understanding of goals and priorities. Plus, it creates a sense of progress,
Yeah.
which can be incredibly motivating.
Visual management is definitely a powerful tool.
Yeah.
But what about those times when you need to address behaviors that aren't aligned with the culture you're trying to create?
Yeah.
You know, those times when people just aren't playing by the rules.
Well, for that, there's a practice called manage your boundaries.
Okay.
It's all about setting clear expectations and limits, whether it's around meeting etiquette communication styles or even basic respect for each other's time.
So it's like drawing a line in the sand and saying,
Right.
this is how we operate here.
Yeah,
But it's got to be done in a way that's respectful and collaborative, right?
absolutely. It's not about being a dictator or micromanaging every little thing. It's
Yeah.
about working together to create a shared understanding of
Right.
what's acceptable and what's not.
That makes sense. It's about establishing a framework for productive and respectful interactions.
Right. And it's important to remember that boundaries aren't static. They can evolve as the culture evolves. Now, here's another practice I found quite interesting. Socialize books.
Socialize books, what does that mean?
It's about using books as tools for learning and cultural change.
Okay.
The book suggests encouraging employees to read books that align with the values and principles you're trying to promote, and then creating opportunities for discussion and sharing.
Oh, I love that. It's like creating a book club for the company,
Exact.
but with a specific purpose in mind.
It's a way to introduce new ideas, stimulate discussion, and get everyone thinking about the culture you're trying to build.
And it doesn't have to be super formal. It could be as simple as sharing book recommendations or having informal discussions about key takeaways.
Exactly. The key is to make it engaging and relevant to people's work and the challenges they're facing. Now, one thing that's essential for any kind of cultural transformation is the practice of inspecting frequently.
This reminds me of the Agile principle of inspect and adapt, right?
It's very much aligned with that. It's about taking a step back on a regular basis to evaluate what's working and what's not, and then making adjustments along the way.
So it's about building in a feedback loop and embracing continuous improvement as a core value.
Exactly. And it applies to culture change just as much as it applies to software development or any other process.
Okay, there's one more practice I wanted to touch on before we wrap up part 2.
Okay.
It's called pay explicit attention.
Ah, yes. This one's about being mindful, observant, and truly present in interactions. It's about noticing those small details, those subtle signals that might reveal issues or opportunities for improvement.
So instead of just going through the motions, you're actively looking for ways to make things better,
Right.
and you're encouraging everyone else to do the same.
Precisely. It's about creating a culture where people feel empowered to speak up, share their observations, and contribute to the continuous improvement process.
Wow, this has been a whirlwind tour of tribal learning practices. I feel like we've covered so much ground.
We have. And it's clear that these practices are interconnected and they work together to create a more agile and learning-focused environment.
Absolutely. But this is just the beginning. In our final segment, we'll be distilling the key takeaways from the culture game
Okay.
and leaving you with a provocative thought to ponder as you embark on your own culture hacking journey. Stay tuned. Okay, so we've explored like a ton of ground in the culture game. What stands out to you as the most actionable stuff? What could someone actually start doing differently tomorrow based on this?
For me, it's that shift in mindset
Yeah.
from big sweeping changes
Yeah.
to these small intentional actions.
It's not about overhauling your entire company culture overnight.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. It's about those seemingly simple things we talked about.
Yeah, like facilitating meetings more effectively or being ridiculously punctual.
Right. Or using visual management to make work more transparent.
Yeah. Or even just encouraging people to share stories that embody your company values.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much impact those small tweaks can have.
Yeah, it's those tiny shifts that, when repeated consistently, can create a ripple effect and gradually transform the entire culture.
I'm also really struck by how much emphasis Mezick puts on psychological safety.
Yeah.
Like,
That's so essential. If people don't feel safe to take risks, share ideas, even make mistakes,
yeah,
then you're not going to get very far with Agile or any kind of innovation.
it all comes back to creating an environment where people feel supported, respected, and empowered to learn and grow.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that's where leadership plays such a crucial role.
Yeah.
It's not just about what leaders say, but what they do. Their actions set the tone for the entire organization.
Totally. And remember that powerful tool we talked about, storytelling.
Oh, yes. Stories are such an effective way to transmit values, inspire action, and create a shared sense of purpose.
I love that idea of asking people to share stories that embody specific values. It's like a way to bring those values to life and make them more tangible.
And it creates a much more engaging and memorable experience than just reading a list of values on a website.
Absolutely. Another big takeaway for me is the importance of inspecting frequently.
Ah, yes, that's a crucial one.
Right.
It's about building in that feedback loop, constantly evaluating what's working and what's not, and making adjustments along the way.
It's about embracing continuous improvement as a core value,
Yes,
both for individuals and for the organization as a whole.
exactly. It's the key to staying agile and adapting to the ever-changing business landscape.
This has been such an insightful deep dive into the culture game. I'm feeling so inspired to start putting these ideas into practice. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought.
Okay.
Imagine you're a culture hacker, armed with all these tribal learning practices. What's one small experiment you could run this week to start shifting your own company culture in a positive direction?
It could be as simple as facilitating your next team meeting in a new way.
Yeah.
Announcing your intentions more clearly, or encouraging someone to share a story that embodies a company value.
Remember, even small changes can have a big impact. So go out there, experiment, have fun, and start hacking those cultures for the better. That's it for this deep dive into the culture game. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep. See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.